Aloha, Linda.
How you doing?
Hey, Linda. I'm great. God bless you. Thanks for doing this. I appreciate it.
Where are you in the islands?
I am in Honolulu, right near Ala Moana Center.
I like it. The only place they use high-rise buildings with any sense.
Say that one more time.
The only place where they use high-rise buildings with any sense. So you get sunshine. Not too bad compared to New York.
Well, I'm super, super appreciative of you doing this for us. It really, really means a lot. So, first and foremost, a gigantic mahalo to you for doing this.
Well, thank you.
And thrilled to get you on the show. First, before we get into this documentary, which is quite a moving thing, too, I've been really touched by some of the things, and it's so appropriate right now with all that's been going on over the last few years, as you obviously know, with the United States. And before we get into the film, where are you right now, and is this where you've been since the pandemic started?
Oh, I'm in San Francisco, yes, and this is where I've been.
And how has the pandemic's arrival altered or affected this release?
Well, I didn't really have anything to do with it. I was just sort of ended by accident. But uh, I don't know. I
Ha-
think it's been, it was supposed to open up in theaters, so it can't do that.
Right. Okay. Well, that's a good, exactly. It can't be happening in theater. So that's one way.
Everybody watches streaming services now anyway.
Right. So no question, it's still going to be able to reach people just as effectively. And as for yourself, can you recall the first moments? Because you're part of a whole series that we're doing. This documentary will be part of our Off the Road series that we're doing on HPR. Can you recall the first moments you began to realize something big was about to happen in terms of this year and the virus?
Um, it was in March actually. I was going on my way to Tucson. I had a flight booked for the next day and had hotel reservations in Tucson. And I talked to Jerry Brown and he said, "This is a big deal. Stay home." And I said, "Oh, I guess I better." Didn't get any of that advice from the federal government, unfortunately. He said, "Oh, it's just a cold. People are getting colds, like the flu." But by the time got around to canceling my hotel reservation, the hotel had already closed.
Right. Oh man, and that was right when it all kicked in. And as for ways you've been personally touched by the crisis, whether through the struggles of everyday Americans and people around the world, or through the losses in the musical world, I'm thinking of people like John Prine, Ellis Marsalis, Manu Dibango, Adam Schlesinger from Fountains of Wayne, of course, Toots Hibbert of Toots and the Maytals, many others. Have any of those things touched you?
Well, John Prine is a terrible loss. I mean, my gosh. I know some people have lost their parents, and it's a shame because maybe none of them needed to die. Maybe if we'd had good leadership and good guidance from the beginning and the truth would have made a difference. The pandemic would have gotten some people, I'm sure. But I don't think we'd be seeing the numbers of people dead that we're seeing now.
And John, you mentioned him. Was that a person you had any relationship or connection to?
Well, I knew him, I didn't know him well, but I loved his songwriting. And
Sure.
for who knows, he was writing at the top of his talent when he died. We might have had a lot of more great John Prine songs out of him.
Well, you point out a very important thing, which is the connection that we all feel, like many people feel to you through one's music. You can make a strong connection even if you never meet them. Like most people never get to meet the musicians they love and admire, but as you've wisely pointed out, you still feel a strong tie because of their music. And
Well, we thought he was telling stories about his life, but it turned out he was telling stories about our lives.
isn't that the truth with all of you great cats, in so many ways, what you've offered? And final question before we dive deep into Linda and the Mockingbirds. One of the other parallels during these last several months, the way that the Black Lives Matter movement grew following the killing of George Floyd, the related police reform crisis. Has that been something that's moved you or touched you?
Oh, so much because it means so much. It has implications for Mexican Americans and Central Americans that are trying to come up and get a job, and everybody is trying to get into the country everywhere. I I think it's a terrific chance for people to look honestly and painfully at race relations in this country and how much it's been just the centerpiece of policy and social intercourse, whether people are able to own property or not, with all the redlining they did in the Midwest. It's just, it's a wonderful opportunity for people to get real. And if it's not hijacked by some terrible, um, ridiculous rhetoric about violence and gang gangs and thugs in the street, because most of the people are just peacefully demonstrating what they, and their opinion is spreading across the land. It seems to be pretty unanimous, or at least be in the significantly in the majority. There are people that are trying to resist it. They're really white supremacists. It's very similar to what Nazi Germany was like, I think.
Well, in so many ways, that's my lead into the film, because really this film is in a lot of context about inclusion, the lack of inclusion in some ways. And it's really a heavy film, and it's a joyous film. And before we get into the bus trip that it's based around, explain your personal connection to Mexico for folks who don't. Some folks obviously know this because of your incredible album, but for others who are more, you know, you're on All Things Considered. So a lot of people cruising home, they may know your name, but they don't know the depth, and we want to include them obviously in our conversation. So growing up in Arizona, explain the backgrounds of your parents and grandparents to set the stage for the movie.
Well, my great grandfather was in Mexico, and it was still part of the United States. Mexico went all the way through Arizona and Nevada, all the way up to Montana. Utah was part of it. California was part of it. Texas was part of it. And at some point, the United States did an enormous land grab, and they just around 1846, and they just bid off a big chunk of Mexico and claimed it as their own. So I always say, we didn't move, the border moved. So there's a place called the Sonoran Desert, and it's pretty much the same culture on both sides. The borderline went through it, but it's the same culture on both sides of the line. And he was born in a little town. My grandfather was born in a little town called Bonamici, which is about 5.5 hours drive southeast of Tucson. We used to go down there and see it. I love the people down there. It's a really interesting culture. There's a river that runs through that is it overflows every year and makes the most fertile land in Mexico. And people have been farming the same way sustainably for 1,000 years. And it's just a very settled, very civilized culture. And I thought it would be fun to take the children that are involved in this cultural group that I've been working with for the last 26 years and let them see what the north of Mexico is like. They've made a lot of trips to southern Mexico to investigate the music and study with masters down there. We took 20 school kids from about age 8 to 19. And then we took my nephew and my first cousin to supply some music on the trip, and my little niece who was 2.5.
Annabelle,
yeah. And so there are 3 generations of Ronstadts and all these kids from the Sensones. We invited Jackson Brown. He had recorded with the Sensones. When I take musicians over there, it's an easy sell because the music is so good.
Right.
They're training the kids so right in music. They teach them how to play it right. They don't have to learn how to perform or become stars or anything like that. They teach you music for the best reasons, which is to learn how to socialize and share your feelings and process your feelings maybe privately, express your joy and your sorrow. There's all kinds of good uses. They don't teach it in schools anymore, so they teach it at the Sensontles Cultural Academy.
Right, the Los Sensontles Cultural Academy. It's in the United States and in California. They help amplify the roots of Mexican culture in the United States, founded by Eugene Rodriguez, and really an incredible figure when you're watching this, and very, very, like I said, it connects back to what you were saying, that the Black Lives Matter thing is just one part of a bigger picture of trying to include all the folks who are really immigrants to this land. Unless you're Native Hawaiian or Native American in some way, then everybody is an immigrant. And you have, it's great how the footage is laid out in this thing, too. James Keach, the director and producer, obviously the one who did that angle of it. But as for that first bit of footage when the film starts, is that Jane Pauley interviewing you? And was that recorded?
Yes.
That was recorded around the time of the '87 release, Canciones de Mi
Yeah,
Padre?
I was just starting my big Mexican tour. And nobody could understand why in the world I was doing Mexican music. If I had to explain it. She wasn't getting it, incidentally, but, you know.
Well, it's a great little segment that you've extracted with her, and it really sucks you in the beginning, especially those haircuts especially her haircut in that scene. I said, wait a minute, when this has to be the late '80s. And explain the drive as we get into the story, because it really sets the stage for the story too. The drive to record that album, it became the best-selling non-English album in the United States, and as people hear when watching the film, a huge inspiration for many young people.
Well, we were lucky that way. I made it not with the idea of would it sell. I didn't care. I've been burning to do those songs for years, and I tried to do it a couple of times earlier. The record company wouldn't let me do it. Finally, I just went to them and said, "I've sold a lot of records for you. Now I'm going to make a record I want to do." And to their credit, they got behind it and tried to sell it. They didn't know how to sell it in Mexico, where it was a hit, but with bootleg product. But they were able to sell it in the United States, and I was able to do my tour and get the mariachi up and get the dancers and have a really fun time doing that music. I love the music. I love the poetry of the lyrics, and I love the rhythms. In Mexico, if you walk across the street, you're in a different rhythm culture, and there's a different language, about 30 different languages spoken in Mexico. So that's why it's even more tragic, these children that they separate from their parents at the border. Lots of times they don't even speak Spanish, and they live in little villages that don't have internet or phones, and they're fleeing poverty caused by drought or caused by gangs or some violence that they have from the government. They're just fleeing for their lives, literally. They're trying to make a better thing for their families. And they separate these children. They deport their families back home and keep the children here and lose touch with how to reconnect them. It's a scandal. They had nothing set up to facilitate reuniting these children with their parents. And it's a shame on the American government. It's a real dark chapter, I think, in our history. What they've done to these children. Some of them were as young as 5 months old. And they took them away out of the arms of their mothers, or 5 years old or 10 years old, doesn't matter. Get separated from your family, it's a big deal. And those children won't ever recover from it. There's some people in the government today who aren't sorry about it. They think it's cool. They think it's punitive. They'll show those brown skinned people who are trying to get into our country. That's their attitude. They're just coming here trying to take something from us. But they're not.
Well, as you said, in a lot of cases, folks are escaping a life many people in America could never even understand it, because it's a very, very difficult life, and you pointed that out. And throughout the film, there are reminders of some of the things you said. A heavy point in the film, Linda and the Mockingbirds at the U.S. border with the bus, and it's explained how one spot you pass is this barren, scary, barbed wire fence roadside, and that's where the ICE agents drop off the deportees.
That's why they throw them across the border like used Kleenex. And we happened to arrive there the day that the United States declared the border a state of emergency. It was one of the biggest crossing gates on the border, Nogales. And, there was nothing happening. There was no rioting. There were no teams of people. There were no caravans. There were a couple of citizens of Nogales out shopping for groceries, and maybe going to pick up their children from school. There were no riots. There was no danger. And it just made me think, when we were on our way back, we had my little niece Annabelle, 2.5, in the bus. And I thought, what would happen if they took Annabelle away from us at the border? What would we do? We'd be beside ourselves. She was the pet of the tour. Everyone loved her. She'd run up and down the bus and get candy from people and sing songs and play games. And we would have just been devastated. She would have been devastated, and we would have been devastated, and nobody ever would be the same again.
You had a great line about that. You said, what if they, quote, just lost her in the system?
Well, that's what they did with all these children. There's hundreds of children they've done exactly that with. The parents don't know who they are, and the children don't know where their parents are.
That's a very touching, that's a very, very touching, one of many touching moments in this thing that really really hits you when you watch something like that. So was it first, dialing back, because everything's based around this Los Sensaciones, was it when you did, I guess it was, obviously, when you did Canciones de Mi Padre, that's how you got to first meet Eugene Rodriguez, the director of that organization?
Well, yeah, that's right. I met him on the street, and I had my big Mexican show on the road. I was in San Francisco. And he and this little group were playing on the street, and they were kids, but they were playing so well that it stopped me in my tracks. I said, "Where are you from? How do these children know how to play like this?" And he explained that they had this cultural center over in the East Bay, and they were trying to get enough money to go to Mexico to take the children on a field trip. They'd take them to southern Mexico and find masters of those traditions. Like, you come over and study with Hulao in the islands, learn traditional hula.
Yeah.
The language. That's what they were doing with these kids, connecting them to their
roots,
generation and their roots. And it was very successful. So I said, well, um, I can add a concert to my tour. So I added a concert to my tour, and I gave them the proceeds, and they took the money and went down to Mexico. They made a film of it. They made several trips. They went to Cuba one time. They went to Europe with the chieftains. I introduced them to the chieftains. They loved them and took them on the road with them. I introduced him to Ry Cooder. He flipped out for them, thought they were wonderful. Was so impressed with Eugene, wrote a song with them, recorded with them.
Right.
Same way with Taj Mahal, and Dave Hidalgo from Los Lobos already knew them, was working with them.
Unbelievable.
For Jackson, it was a cinch. Jackson just fell in love with them.
You're right. And we'll hear about the Jackson in one second. But just to be clear, so because this is a great add-in that is not, if you're watching the film closely, because not everybody's going to have to interview you afterwards, but I realized from it, and you just sort of said it. So there was you first financed them to go and do a bus trip way back when that record had come out. And then this is a second bus trip, though, that the film is based around then.
Right, I got to go this time.
Right, exactly, and involving you. So you didn't go the first time. You basically just set it up and paid for them to be able to go and do this cultural journey. And then
they set it up. I paid for it, but they came back with a video of it. It was very, very impressive.
Oh, it's super cool. It's cool, super cool. So you paid for that. They set it up. They went. They did that, and then all these years later, so through the years up from that in the late 80s up till 2019, you just maintained a connection with these cats that eventually ends up being you joining them for the bus ride that happened in 2019.
Yeah, well, I was always involved with them. I went over to the center a lot, and they remodeled at some point. I donated them a dishwasher, I think, at some point. And I introduced them to people like the musicians that I knew.
Right.
And when I had the trip set up to go to Mexico with some friends, and I said, we got room on the bus, why don't you bring the kids? And so it started that way. And then I was in the middle of, they were finishing a documentary about me that I hadn't cooperated with particularly. Not because I didn't like them, but because it was their job to make their film. And they said they wanted an interview with me. And I said, if they want to interview me, they have to come to Mexico. They tend to, people when they do my life, they tend to disregard the fact that I'm Mexican American, that I've spent a lot of time doing Mexican music.
Right.
I don't know why, but it just isn't important to them. And I didn't want them to do that with this documentary. So I said, you have to come to Mexico. And when we went to Mexico with all the kids, James Keach was really impressed with the group, like everybody else has been, and wanted to. Eugene had already planned to do a documentary. We were using Eugene's film crew because we didn't have room for 2 film crews on the bus. So we used 1 film crew, and James Keach decided to take over the production of what Eugene was doing.
Incredible. So it came as like a spin-off to the other documentary, basically, The Sound of My Voice.
A lot of work that Eugene had already done. So Eugene was essentially the co-producer of that documentary.
That's really, really cool. And so then basically what? You hire that bus and gather everybody up and take them from California down to Mexico?
Yeah.
I mean, it's such an organic thing. I just have to point out those basics, because when people listen, it's just, it's touching, and it's not the kind of, I see why you wanted to make sure that when they covered you, that they covered this aspect, because to me, this is a really, really important part. And you mentioned it, and now it's worth dialing in a little closer. You ended up bringing your buddy Jackson Brown on this trip, and
he'd never been to that part of Mexico. He was excited about it. I mean, nobody had ever been there. It's not a tourist place. You can't. There's not one T-shirt shop. You know? In fact, there's nothing you can buy. It's just a cow town, but it's just wonderful people and really, really, really good food that's grown locally.
And what did you do? You call him up or say, hey, I'm going to do this thing. I want you to come. Explain that part.
I said, I'm taking the Sensones to Mexico. Why don't you come? We'll have good food. He likes good food.
That's a good sell.
And he'd already written a song with the Sensones. He knew what their music was. He knew the quality of their music, and he loved Eugene Rodriguez. So
The Dreamer. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. We hopped in the bus and went. Jackson and I have a long history of bus trips. We toured together in the 70s.
Yeah, I was going to say, how far, because that's a connection. How far back do you go with Jackson? Explain the depth of your friendship, perhaps when you guys first connected.
Well, I met him in 1965. He was 17 and I was 18. And he had written a song called These Days, which I thought was a great song. And, I thought, wow, here in California, I grew up in Tucson. I came over to California to find music. So they got some pretty good songwriters here in California. And it was Jackson. He's still writing at the top of his talent.
What an incredible thing. And then, so you hire this bus, you guys go down there. How long of a ride also, Linda, is it approximately?
5.5 hours down and 5.5 hours back.
How long were you there?
About 4 days.
And you pick up the tab for this whole thing for everybody?
Well, we got it financed by, there's several foundations that finance things that projects that the
Sure.
Sensors do.
Okay, makes sense. Totally makes sense. And so that Jackson Brown, you mentioned it, that collaboration he did with Eugene the Dreamer, is that collaboration essentially, did that come about because of you introducing those two, or do I have that wrong?
No, I introduced them.
So I have it right. That's how it happened.
Yeah, I had ulterior motives. I wanted to hear Jackson sing with David Hidalgo. It happened. I thought they sounded alike somehow. There's like a weird similarity between them. And I thought I'd love to hear them sing together. So I called up Jack and I said, I'm dying to hear you sing with David Hidalgo. Why don't you come record it with a sing-song lesson, David? So he did, and it worked out.
You've got great ulterior motives, young lady. I got to say,
They're always founded on music.
Right, and good things though. I mean, trying to get exposure for stories that need exposure, and I like that. I like the way you put it. In the film, you also offer some memories of being a little girl with your grandmom. You're talking about at one point her influence on you, especially through what it sounds like are cross-border trips that you would take to Mexico. Share with us some of those experiences in Mexico with your grandma and the way that they shaped you.
Well, in those days, we'd go as a family and we'd visit family friends along the way in the north of Mexico on our way to Guaymas, which is a seaport. And in the summer we'd go down there because it was a little bit cooler in Guaymas next to the ocean. But on the way down, we stop at all the different ranches. My father did business with. My father was in the hardware business, and he sold all the ranchers everything they needed. You know, housewares, big bulldozers, combines, windmills, tools, fishing equipment, rifles, whatever you needed to to live on a ranch. My father had it. And so he had all these friends. We'd go across the border very casually. We'd go across and have lunch, do a little shopping, come home. Or we'd go to baptisms or weddings or quinceañeras. There was a debutante ball that we went to, the black and white ball that was in Hermosillo. And, you know, we just had family and friends and everybody knew each other and it was fun. We didn't have that fence there then. We went through the gate. We went through the official gate, but it took 20 minutes. Now it takes hours.
I mean, it wasn't such a big border production, you're saying, basically.
No. Same culture. It just there wasn't the big fence and you didn't have to go through all the rigmarole.
Right. That fence is, I've only done it once going from San Diego across the border, and it's a very intimidating, that whole area. It's like a couple miles of like nothing but gigantic fences, huge towers with lights, nothing on the ground. It's not a fun place there. And
a real intrusion on the environment.
Say that again.
It's a real insult and an intrusion on the environment.
No doubt about that, because it's just barren. There's no grass. There's and a lot of Americans have experienced it, but for those who haven't, when you see it or do it yourself, it's not a great feeling. It's very
the desert, which leaves an ugly scar in the desert and starts erosion.
Right.
We've also put the fence right through the Tohono O'odham Native American reservation, and they've made it so that they can't function in their own nation. You know, they've got this fence, and also it interferes with animal migration. It's going to destroy a lot of species. There's a lot of very fragile species still living in that environment, in that ecosystem. They've disturbed it greatly.
Well, that's a very good point. And on our show, we're constantly talking about the issues of imperiled animals. Being here in the Asia Pacific, we have a particular interest in elephants, rhinos, pangolins, lions, tigers, all the animals being snuffed out.
Beings too, because they, you know, if you're working as a border patrol agent in that hot, stinking desert and you're getting a very small salary, it makes you very easy to bribe.
That's right.
The cartels have all the money in the world, so they'll come up to some guy who's making $50,000 a year, $40,000 a year, and say, "How would you like to make $200,000 a year?" And they go, "Yeah, boy." And so it criminalizes a whole piece of the government.
Right, and all kinds of stuff comes over the border, is what you're saying. Not just
banks are getting rich because they're laundering the cartel's money. So nobody wants to, and the private prison systems are getting rich because they're putting in people that they arrested at the border, and they're making a fortune. They make billions of dollars of profit from those prisons, and they treat people abysmally. It's like a concentration camp. It is a concentration camp. So it's really hard to get any legislation just to change it. And people like Donald Trump start all this rhetoric to get people to hate Mexicans, and especially hate Central Americans that are coming up trying to. He doesn't mind if people come through the northern border from Canada. But he minds if they come through the southern border.
I've never understood. That thing is so much larger, too, and totally left alone. Who knows what's coming across that border? People, weapons, contraband, like you said.
Well, the World Trade Center came across the Canadian border.
Say that again?
The people that blew up the World Trade Center, terrorists that bombed the World Trade Center, came across the Canadian border into this country.
Yeah, you point out a huge hypocrisy there.
They didn't come from Mexico.
Right. No, I hear you loud and clear. And one of the other touching aspects of Linda and the Mockingbirds that there are several that were just very, very moving. And again, this is a very timely thing, talking about this topic, the greater topic of inclusion in our country. It could not be more important. There's this scene where a girl is performing in Mexico, and you've got this dance and music troupe. You've brought them down there. They're getting to perform in Mexico. These are Mexican Americans. Now they're performing, and in the audience are Mexican performers too. So it's like a merge of performers from across the border, if you will, with that shared cultural background. And this girl is performing, and she dedicates a song to you, a haunting tune too. The lyrics of this thing, "At the Edge of a Palm Grove," it really hits you, and they're translated on the screen. Explain why that song, because it's moving to watch you during when that's played. Explain why that song and that moment was so significant to you.
Well, at family parties, that song usually always come toward the end of the evening. A song about a little orphan girl that's all alone, maybe 8 years old, at the edge of a palm grove, and she lives in this little palm grove. And somebody comes and says, "Who are you? Who's with you?" And she says, I have nobody. I'm a little orphan. I live in this palm grove, and every day I come and go like the waves of the ocean." And everybody would always cry, and it was a real sentimental song. I never heard a record of it. I just heard my grandfather singing it, my father eventually, and then eventually us. My brother and my two cousins had a group, and they used to sing it, perform it. So it's just been really meaningful to 4 generations of Ronstadts.
Right. It has a deep connection, you're saying, going back so many decades in your life. That's touching. There's these scenes in the documentary. It's bolstered by discussions, interviews with Mexican-American families about some of their experiences. One that maybe hit me the hardest, it's this family that are speaking. They're a California-based Mexican-American family, and the child is like, he appears to be a teenager and speaks excellent English. And I mean, he's an American kid, and he's sitting with his parents, and he tells the horrifying story of being 5 and his dad being detained. He breaks down when he's talking about it. For yourself, what were some of the lasting moments or impressions from the trip that really hit you, kind of like the way this one hit me?
Well, that kid's little brother was the star of the tour. You know, he was about 8, and he had a great little haircut, and he had a great little style, and he was just so Mexican-American, but they're different. It's a different culture from Mexico. It's really influenced by Mexico, but it's a different culture, and then Mexican-American culture is affecting Mexican culture, and it works both ways across the border. It's still going on, and his older brother was the one that told that story. Imagine what it would be like if your father was working hard every day, going off to work, and your mom was working, and you go to school every day and you come home and everybody was there, and then one day your dad isn't there because some policeman came and dragged him away. You're doing nothing but trying to make a living. It would shatter your illusions of goodness and security.
So I'm guessing that is one of the more touching moments for you too.
Oh my God. Well, I know those people. I know the whole family.
Right.
I mean, they're really good people. They're just trying to get along and trying to make a living.
Yeah, it's a real poignant moment in the film, and in a lot of ways sums up so many of the aspects of it. Not to mention just watching the folks with those incredible outfits that they've got, and the reaction of the Mexican performers watching these Mexican American performers must have given you a great satisfaction having engineered this. And perhaps when you think of taking Jackson, was there any particular moment with him where you look back fondly of and are grateful that you got him to come along?
Well, Jackson was amazed at the food and the tortillas. He never had real tortillas before. And they make a certain kind of wheat that grow in that region, and they pat them out by hand, and they get to be enormous. They're the size of a pizza, and they taste delicious. They're made with lard and sugar. Not sugar, lard and flour, and that's it, and salt. And then they're cooked on a comal, which is over a wood fire, so they get a smoky kind of wood burning taste, and they're delicious. And they make the best burritos. You've never had that before. I grew up eating that way. So when I come to the United States, I go, I don't want to go for Mexican food. You can't get any good tortillas.
The only time I was there, it's funny you said that because I remember watching the women rolling out the tortilla chips, and then the taste was just it's unearthly. It's not.
Well, they only roll them. They roll them in certain parts, but in that certain place in Mexico where they grow that particular kind of wheat, and they make them in that particular style, it's all handmade. They don't use a rolling pin.
Wow.
It's made with wheat flour. The kind of tortillas we mostly get for Mexican food is corn tortillas, and they're good too if they're made by hand.
So you're saying they just roll them with their hand, is what you're saying?
Yeah, they roll them. They flap them back and forth like pizza dough.
Yeah, I was gonna say like a pizza. Wow, that's cool. That's a. There are so many ups, and I mean, it's an inspiring story. There are horrifying and sad moments, but ultimately, you leave with a lot of inspiration. And I was hoping to be able to ask a few questions about other aspects of your career. Would that be okay?
Sure.
One thing I've been curious about after growing up with you, I'm 49, Linda, so you've been a soundtrack to my life for a very long time, especially being young. My late mother was a fan. Explain.
I'm almost 30 years older than you are.
Say again?
I'm almost 30 years older than you are.
Right, that's what I mean. Well, that's why I set the stage so that you understand the importance of, who you would be in my life growing up with parents who were into the civil rights in the 60s and 70s culture. Explain how you gravitated first as a young child to performing and first finding your singing voice, but maybe more importantly, having the confidence to be able to share it with others.
Well, I didn't have the confidence, and I didn't find my singing voice really until I started singing, until I went to Broadway. And I learned that I could incorporate a part of my voice that I hadn't been using for my whole career, my upper extension. And I learned how to marry it to the rest of my voice. And I went home and made the Nelson Riddle records and the Mexican records and Cry Like a Rainstorm that I did with Aaron Neville. And that was the best singing that I did in my career, everything after 1980. But before, I was a ballad singer. I started out wanting to sing folk music. I started out wanting to do Mexican music, but I wasn't able to learn it professionally because there weren't the musicians that I could get access to. I sang with my family, but it wasn't up to a professional level. It was years before I was able to get all that stuff coordinated because I needed to go and hang out with a Mexican band for a bunch of months and really just woodshed. But I tried to sing folk music, and then we got to Los Angeles, and folk rock was happening with the Byrds. And I thought, well, I knew the bass player. He had been a mandolin player in a bluegrass band that I knew. So I thought, well, if he can, it was Chris Hillman. He'd been in this bluegrass band called I can't remember what they were called. The Hackberry Ramblers, I think, or something. I can't remember what they were called. Anyway, he was in this bluegrass band, and I thought if he can sing in an electric band, I can too. I was in this band called the Stone Ponies. We tried to do folk rock. We weren't very successful at it. But I eventually went out on my own. The two guys in the Stone Ponies went and did other things. And I just kept trying to get better. I wasn't very good. I didn't know what I was doing. I started singing country music because I'd learned it from my sister, and there was 3 chords I could play on the guitar.
It's funny.
I like country music, but I was trying to do it I wanted to do country music like rhythm and blues, and rhythm and blues like country music. It sort of met in the middle.
Right.
So country rock.
That's kind of funny. That's one of the reasons I wanted to bring it up because the band The Eagles, we were thrilled when we had Timothy B. Schmidt on the show not that long ago, a few years back, I guess. But one of the stories he told brought you up, and it fits right in with what you're talking about, that border between country and not really just country, but a different kind of spin on it. He explained how he first met some of his future Eagle bandmates like Don Henley, Glenn Frey, and others when he was working on a project backing you. Well,
the band did. That's right. I I knew Glenn Fry, and I knew Bernie Ledden, because Bernie Ledden had been in my band, but Bernie had to go on a tour with the Flying Burrito Brothers because he also played in that band.
Mm.
So I had to go find a guitar player. And I was living with John David Souther at the time, and Glenn had been his singing partner. They had a group called Long Branch Penny Whistle, and I knew he could play the guitar really well. So I said, "Hey, you want to come and go on this tour with me? Because I need to replace Bernie." And he said, "Sure." And we were walking through the Troubadour bar one night, or walking through the Troubadour Club where they play music. We were in the bar, but in order to get to the bathroom, you have to go through the place where they're performing. And I heard this band on stage playing Silver Threads and Golden Needles, but my arrangement of it, including the guitar solo note for note. I was looking for a drummer, and I thought, well, I'll go and ask this drummer and see if I can get him to go on the road with me, because they already knows the songs. Because clearly they knew my album.
Right.
So I went and talked to the drummer, and he said, yeah, he'd like to do it. He was Don Henley. So I had Don Henley and Glenn Fry in my band, and they were rooming together because we couldn't afford to have everybody have their own room, so they had to double up. So Don and Glenn were rooming together. They started writing songs together, and then they decided they wanted to have a band together. And I said, well, great. Put a band together, and while you're doing that and be trying to get a record contract, you can play with me and you'll have a bit income. So I said, you ought to try Bernie Ledden. He's really good. He can sing. And John Boylan, my manager at the time, said, I've been working with this guy, Randy Meisner. He'd been working with him with Ricky Nelson's band. He said he can sing real high and he plays bass. So they tried him out and they really liked him. And that became the Eagles.
Unbelievable.
And they came over and rehearsed at our house. J.D. Souther and I were living together. They came over and rehearsed in our living room. We went out to the movies and saw a double feature so we could give them some chance to rehearse. We came back and we were singing Witchy Woman in 4-part harmony in this small room that sounded really good, you know. And they'd been working all day long tuning their harmonies up. They had the vocals went really down perfect. It was just, we walked in and we went, oh, this is a hit. These guys are going to be so successful. It's ridiculous. We were delighted.
Unbelievable. What a great story. And I mean, your impact on so many different kinds of folks who just loved your sound, loved what you did. I mean, one example, a few years after you released your cover of You're No Good, Van Halen released a cover seemingly inspired by your hit. Have you ever spoken with anyone in that band about that?
No, I didn't know they did it.
You didn't even know. Well, that it was on Van Halen too, and again, that's what I mean. It's the depth of you've touched people in so many ways. Whether it's like Broadway productions like Pirates, or trio recordings with Emmylou Harris and Dolly Parton, or another one I remember. And I've always been curious about this, and it probably just came and went because you have so many experiences. My late mom introduced me to Led Zeppelin via The Song Remains the Same soundtrack, and I still remember around that time seeing a cool photo of you with Robert Plant and Ron Wood. It was very circulated. Do you remember when that was taken?
Oh yeah, I remember that photograph. I always wondered who that other person was in the photograph. I got a copy of that photograph.
And when was that? At a Zepp show or something?
No, I think it was at the Grammys.
Wow.
That's
I mean, you've touched so many folks. And on that note of touching people, you kind of mentioned it on the front end of the interview when we're talking about the pandemic, and you said you got tipped off to the severity of it from someone that you had a relationship with, one of many people that were famous people, Governor Jerry Brown from California. And looking at your history, unless I have some of this wrong, and you'll correct me if I do, he also later actor, comedian Jim Carrey later.
Oh, I was just a dalliance. I didn't know how old he was, and I found out how old he was. I was horrified. You know, it's hard to tell. Everyone looks young in Los Angeles. You know, everybody looks young in Hollywood. I was about 14 years older than he was. We were talking one day about President Kennedy. He said, I wasn't alive when Kennedy was president. I said, see you later.
That's a good one. Star Wars director George Lucas?
Well, I went out with him after, because he was older than I was. Jerry. We're still good friends. I'm still good friends with Jerry and his wife, too. He's got a really great wife. I love her. She's got a great sense of humor.
Jerry Brown you're talking about.
Yeah, and she's been really good for Jerry. He's a lot more confident and a lot more socially aware.
And
She's really civilized him. He's always been really smart, but he was a little rough around the edges. She took him in hand.
and still tight with George. Is that what you said?
We're still friends, yeah.
Still friends. And you mentioned when we were talking, you mentioned you threw out a Hawaii reference. I'm sure a lot of people hear their ears perked up talking about hula dancing and halaus and those collectives. And it made me think.
I'm a hula fanatic.
Say again?
I'm a hula fanatic. I love hula. Here in San Francisco, he's got the halau here. Patrick Makuakani.
Say that again.
Patrick Makuakani is here with a halau that he's founded, and I go and see their performances every year. They're sort of like the Sensolas of Hawaii here. He's really a force of nature. He's studied all the traditional chants, and he speaks Hawaiian, and he's a great force in hula.
Well, that's a great context to give it, actually, to compare it to the Sensontlas. I like that, and that's a great way to understand it. And your Hawaii memories, the Diamond Head Crater Fest of 2006, was that the last time that you performed here, at least? Was that the last time you were here, or have you been since?
No, I haven't been since then.
And that was not... Say again?
Too far across the ocean.
It is a long haul. That's what I say, Linda, about coming there. As much as
really. Stay where you are. You're much better over there.
As much as I love San Francisco, my favorite restaurant in the world is there, the Stinking Rose.
Oh yeah, that's a good place. A lot of garlic.
Yeah, all the garlic stuff.
No, I used to watch hula, and I'd think it's such a generous ritual. Hula. It's so giving and loving and warm. And every time I go, it was in the wintertime, and I'd always have the flu, and I'd always feel better after I come out of there. I think it's a real healing thing. But I used to say, God, if only we had a president that could hula. And Obama got elected, and I'm sure they taught him at Punahou the basics of hula. I don't think he was ever asked to perform it. We don't know what the results would have been, but I thought someone who really has a knowledge of hula and the culture and the aloha culture, they'd have to be good.
Listen to you dropping the Punahou reference. My girlfriend went there, so it's just you've got the local people. Everybody's ears have perked up so much with this interview. You don't often get that on the thing. You did mid-'70s Crater Fest too, right? What are some, when you've mentioned a few things, Hawaii? So
the islands originally in 1971 or 1969, I think, with Chip Douglas, who was the producer of the Monkees. He lived over in Wailua on the North Shore.
That was your first time coming?
It was my first time in the islands, and it was amazing. There were still Saimin stands, and I remember going to Mr. Sagara's store. It was this little Japanese-owned store where you could buy a nightgown or some fishing line or some sushi. It was really good. I love that kind of a store. And the sidewalks were still wooden, and there would be a drive-in in the center of town with the Saimin stand. It was really good. I don't know if that's still there. I remember there were pineapple fields on the north side of the island.
There's a lot of that, but it's, as you can imagine, there's been some development too. But you had played in that crater in the 70s, correct? That was not your first time.
I remember that. That was fun.
Yeah, you really have, just the things that you've gotten to do are astounding. As we wrap it up, any final thoughts, anything I didn't bring up that is pressing or that you wanted to add?
I don't think so.
Anything on the Hawaii that you didn't mention? Any other Hawaii connections? Any other people out here or experiences that pop in your mind that were precious to you?
I'm trying to think. No, I don't know that I can think of.
You tight with
that are from there.
Right, I was gonna say we got like Willie Nelson. We have a whole contingent of folks who Pat Simmons from the Doobies. A lot of people are have that second home. Dave Mason, he's a guest on the show. Lives over.
I can only afford one house, but I wouldn't want to have it so far across the sea. I think I'd get to Hawaii and just stay there. Hard to visit my family.
That's a great note right there to leave it on. And I hope, Linda, that first, I appreciate you having done this with us, but I sincerely hope from me to you that this was a positive experience to be on the show with us.
It was. You have the aloha spirit. I commend you.
I'm giving you a big hug and a high five. And
aloha, my friends. It's Linda Ronstadt. And yes, I've returned for the pledge drive. I'm thrilled to be here with my friend Dave Lawrence, and it was a treat to be part of the Off the Road series. But I have a question. You know this is a nonprofit radio station, right? Listeners become members, and that's how we survive. So since you're listening to HPR, please support it, and a big mahalo.
Well, I don't know about a short memory, young lady. You just smoked that thing like you owned it.
Oh, good. There weren't too many numbers or letters to remember.
I told you. I promised you I'd keep it easy. And man, it's a thrill to get to talk to you, and I really appreciate it. And I love the documentary. I love being touched in that way. It's so timeless and very timely to do something like Linda.
I'm glad you liked it.
I liked it a lot. And thank you again for being part of the show and for doing this. And just please stay safe, and wishing you nothing but good things.
Thanks. Same back. Bye.
Take care, Linda. Aloha.